I'd now like to introduce Joan FitzGerald from comScore.
Thank you very much. Okay, so what do I do here? Just green button. Okay, green button. That's easy. I could do that. Thank you very much for this first opportunity to present what the project that comScore did for the CIMM last year. We are, just to give you sort of a baseline, our study period was September and October of last year. And towards the end of the year is when we delivered our big set of reports and output to CIMM. And so what we've been doing over the past several weeks is taking all of the individual media companies and advertisers who participated in the study through their individual reports. So from the perspective of this presentation, I'm going to share with you some insights that we found from the data, but it's not a very data-heavy presentation yet. And I'm at future conferences, such as the ARF conference next month, I'll be presenting a more comprehensive look at some of the things that we found. But for now, I want to talk about what we did, what we saw as the opportunity with this project, how we did it, and then share those insights with you. So per Patty's comment earlier in the day, our measurement really hasn't kept up with what consumers are actually doing in a multi-platform world. And what we wanted to do was look at how consumers, when they have access to multiple platforms, what are they actually doing with those platforms? So as Jane said, this was a verification process, sort of verifying the viewership, how many people used each platform, how long they were using the platforms, and how much time they were spending with each of the platforms. We really looked at it as sort of two types of content, maybe 3 and 4 different platforms. So the types of content were video content, of course, but also website content, banner ads, static advertising, as well as video advertising. So we took a more comprehensive look at the digital world and tried to measure all of these kinds of communication elements that were part of the digital media space. The platforms that we measured were television, the internet via a computer, the mobile phone. The consumers in our panel, we qualified them by having at least one member of the family with a smartphone or a tablet. And so we asked these consumers in our panel to register their smartphones and their tablets with us. And so what we were interested in discovering is, oops, got to remember to push my buttons here. What's the difference between consumers who use one platform versus those that use multiple platforms? What's the size of the duplicated and the unduplicated audience? And how many consumers use 2 platforms or 3 platforms or 4 platforms at the same time? And when did they do this? What were the habits relative to the media content? What we did was our panel was big enough so that we were able to break out individual content for individual media companies. And so in terms of the reporting, we produced reports for 10 media companies and with a whole variety of information in there. The television information, because we were using set-top box data, was quite in-depth because we had introduced some innovation into how we were processing set-top box data, and we wanted our subcommittee and the recipients of these reports to really take a good look at what the network level data was, how we aggregated groups of networks, what the program level data was, and even at the episode level. So we really got very deep into some of this television viewing information that we had. On the internet side, we were very fortunate to be able to leverage, well, I'm at comScore, so I shouldn't think this is fortunate, but I would leverage the comScore infrastructure for digital measurement, which is very complex. But we were able to sort of take that right away. We didn't have to make any significant changes to the comScore way of doing things. We have an excellent dictionary that classifies all of the web content. We used that same dictionary to classify the online content. We used the dictionary for the mobile content. So that was absolutely terrific. And for the first time, we combined web traffic and online video traffic and mobile traffic into a single report from these single source panelists. So that was another big kind of step forward in terms of looking at multimedia content. So from a CIMM perspective, though, let me just cover at the 50,000-foot view what they wanted us to do. They said, well, number one, it has to be single source. Number two, mobile is smartphones and tablets. So we came in with a proposal that at that time excluded tablets, and we kind of, after we talked to the CIMM membership, we backtracked and made sure that tablets were specifically included as part of the measurement protocol. And also, it has to have the foundation to scale in the future. So for this study, we achieved 10,000 total panelists. There were 1,000 of those were what we consider active mobile users. These were mobile consumers with a smartphone who accessed content that had incorporated the comScore beacon during the study period. So we had more mobile users than that, but those were the ones that were active during the study period. Let's see. So the other thing I want to mention to you is that this was not a nationally representative panel in many ways. First, we were seeking out consumers who had access to multiple platforms. We were not including, by design, we weren't looking for consumers who only had a television set or didn't have broadband internet or didn't have smartphones in the home. We really wanted these consumers to be consumers who access the platforms. The other aspect of it not being nationally representative is that we used as the television base set-top box data. We have a relationship with AT&T. So these folks had to be subscribers to the AT&T UVerse service to be in this particular platform. So again, the panel was 1,000 people. It was a single source panel because the media exposure was captured from the same consumers. And one of the questions you might have is, well, okay, so we have this whole big mishmash of data. We have the person-level internet usage from the comScore system. We have persons-level mobile usage from the mobile phones. We have household-level data from the television set-top boxes. That was something that CIMM asked us to tackle, was how we would estimate demographics for the television set-top box data. And I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here, but suffice it to say that we did that, and we were able to produce persons-level data. That's not to say that household-level data isn't valuable. For certain marketers, looking at a household perspective could be very valuable, particularly as the data can be integrated with third-party purchase data sets, right? And that's all household-based, address-based kinds of third-party data matching. But we did seek for this project to do persons-level data. Okay. Because of CIMM put a priority on it. So again, those were the goals for the study. And we ultimately produced reports for 10 media companies and 3 advertisers. These were advertisers who were running cross-platform campaigns during the study period. So not every advertiser in the CIMM, represented in CIMM, did that. And we measured the media company assets across the floor, 4 platforms. So as I mentioned, we're still looking at the data and taking the media companies and the advertisers through the data. So what you're going to see here is our aggregation of the results to kind of come up with just some sort of top-line findings for you with the promise of more in the future. So here's one thing that I want to show. And you've seen this probably, you may have seen this before, but it's sort of holding true in our panel as well, is that multi-screen consumers are spending more time with the content. So across the board, for all of the media companies in the study, they each picked different things that they wanted to have measured. And when we averaged and aggregated these results, what we found was that the time spent per user, we created an index, was higher among the user groups that consumed the content from that media company across multiple platforms. So the first, the top line here is these are user groups down the left-hand side. And what this is showing is that users of the TV and the web and online video are spending 60% more time overall with that content than consumers, than the total average. Consumers who are consumed on the TV and the web platform are 40% more. Then we get to online video consumers are also generally heavier users of the media company's content overall. And then you get down to, interestingly, one of the things we saw was that the mobile users didn't appear, this wasn't across the board, but the mobile users appeared to have lower levels of overall usage of the media than other user groups. So this is kind of gives you a sense of how we're breaking down the media company data. And I have to call out one particular CIMM member company, and that is ESPN. Both Artie and Glenn, they look at the data from a user and usage perspective, right? And that's what we tried to bring into these reports, was looking at user groups defined by their media habits and usage for each of those media groups to really better understand how they are behaving in the multi-platform marketplace. This is not intended to be an eye chart. There's no reason for you to look at the actual numbers. This is just a random report. But it shows you the perspective that we are trying to bring to this study, which is looking at all the overlaps. One circle is TV, the other is web traffic, the middle circle is online video, and the fourth circle is mobile. We're really trying to provide a visual perspective that says, here's your duplicated audience, here's your duplicated minutes, here's your average usage numbers. What is the audience that's being delivered across these platforms as a whole? Because we're all working in the multi-platform world right now. And then from an advertiser perspective, as I mentioned, we included 3 advertising campaigns during the study period. The advertising campaigns were overwhelmingly television, and television did a great job for these marketers. You could see that the television advertising was well targeted for the brands. It worked well. So what I wanted to show you was, okay, what was digital contributing to the campaign? And again, this is a little odd because I averaged the results across the 3 brands, and these brands were very different from one another. So, but some interesting things emerged. The first thing that emerged is that online helped boost exposure frequency among multi-screen consumers. So approximately 50% of the frequency among multi-screen consumers happened online. As you can see here, it happened across the demographic segments, is that it was 50% of these multi-screen consumers, that means consumers who consumed who saw the commercial or the advertisement on at least 2 screens, 50% of their frequency was coming from the online platforms. Now, I need to disclose this little footnote in the bottom. Aggregated results across the campaigns measured during the study period, results may not be generalizable to the population, but this is what I have for you today. And what happened was, because online accounted for so much of the exposure frequency, it brought exposure among these cross-platform consumers up to on par with consumers exposed on TV. So the consumers exposed on TV already had a frequency level of generally between 4 and 5, except for children. And what we found was that for the multi-screen consumers, the online helped bring their exposure frequency up to the levels of the television exposed. And then we also found that online advertising improved targeting overall for the campaign. And so these are just TV-exposed consumers. And now you have to kind of make a leap of faith here that persons 12 to 34, 18 to 34, 18 to 49 are the targets for these brands. And there's of course, some variation in the brands. But what you could see is that the online impressions really delivered to these key demographic targets for these brands in the study. So, you know, we're continuing to dig into the data. It's really a fantastic data set. I mean, it's just really great to be able to have enough sample size to break out, you know, cross-platform consumers and look at them. Ooh, my time's up. Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry. So what's next? I'll just mention what's next. You know, CIMM is looking for how do we scale this? Because 10,000 persons is a good panel, but we really need to be taking advantage of more of the assets that we have. We need to be able to take advantage of the set-top box data. I mean, it's data on every household. This was a subset of those. We need to be taking advantage of the data that we have on internet usage and online video usage and mobile usage, you know, the census data, that data sets that are available to us, but we still need that single source consumers for the real insights about how they build multi-platform into their day. Okay, well, thank you very much. Okay, and it is my pleasure to introduce Carol Edwards from Arbitron, who will share the study that they did for CIMM.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Carol Edwards, and as I'm sitting kind of today listening to, you know, the various presentations, I have to tell you that my one regret kind of going into my presentation is that I did not share and bring a picture of the Arbitron cross-platform logo that we actually are considering and debuted at our sales meeting a couple weeks ago. But just to give you a little bit of a mental visual, it is a highly Greek god-looking guy pushing a massive boulder up a mountain. And he is naked, so we're not sure if it's going to fly through Arbitron's legal department, but we are seriously considering not replacing the classic Arbitron logo, but for cross-platform, we are seriously considering the naked guy with the boulder. So anyway, Arbitron's three-screen single-source approach for CIMM. Let's go ahead and just dive right in. We had three major objectives, and you know, this too was a project that was squarely in the verification bucket. And you know, the objectives were very straightforward and clear. This was a proof of concept project, and it was really to determine the feasibility of building a scalable single source three-screen panel. We were going to measure the three screens for both programs as well as campaigns, and we hoped along the way to gain some new insights regarding three-screen users and usage. So what Arbitron did was we put together a 500-person single-source panel that was drawn from our people who were prior Arbitron currency PPM panelists. And the measurement period, the official measurement period for CIMM is actually still ended at the end of the January survey, but it ran for 3 months from November through January 2012. It was true single source at its purest, I guess, one panelist, 3 screens, and really 4 screens. We actually did include tablets in our sample as well. But the way it worked was we used our PPM, Arbitron's PPM, for measuring broadcast and cable television. We collect, you know, it's a persons-based device, so we follow the person. So we're able to capture television viewing both in and out of home. We then ask those panelists who had taken back their PPM to go and download meters for both their PCs as well as their mobile devices. For this pilot, we did not include Apple phones and tablets, but we did include both Android and BlackBerry, and we'll talk about that a bit more. So, you know, one person, I'm carrying the PPM, I've downloaded a meter on my smartphone, and I've also downloaded a meter on my PC. And I would just kind of go back for a second and say one of the reasons that Arbitron felt like it was critical to run this proof of concept outside of its currency panel, which is definitely where we plan to go in the future to gain scale, to leverage the 70,000 people that we have across the country already carrying PPM devices. We wanted to try some new things. Obviously, measuring 3 screens and mobile devices was a new thing. But the other new thing that we had talked to the CIMM members and the CIMM committee about was the ability to really make sure that the person who was sitting in front of the PC was actually the same person who we were collecting the media exposure via the PPM from. So we did some things that were new and innovative that we didn't want to try initially in our currency panel, but we wanted to try in this outside panel. So we used a pop-up so that when you came to your computer screen, it was, please confirm you're Carol Edwards using the PC. So we've really felt like getting that linkage, that tighter linkage between television and mobile data to the PC data was critical for this project. We used Panelist Materials. One of the things that we haven't talked a lot about today, I think, is, just sort of the research rigor and quality that goes around managing a 3-screen panel. We learned a ton along the way about that, and I'll talk a little bit towards the end. But we went back to an internet-based site that the PPM panelists are used to working with every day, which is called My Meter and Me. It's where they track points for carrying their meter. It's where they, find out different news that's applicable to them. So we managed this panel with using the My Meter and Me website. When they logged in, they were asked to take a quick survey, which really was predominantly an inventory of, their PC, how they're using their PC, mobile devices, et cetera. And then the final step in that survey was to go ahead and install the meters. And so there were detailed instructions about how to go about those installations. The panel composition, we were actually very pleased with how the panel composition came out. This is for November. It's the actual in-tab panel, the 3-screen in-tab panel. And you'll see a nice curve on the age groups, not heavily younger, older, a nice curve there. Race, ethnicity, the same thing. And a nice even split male-female. And here you'll actually see the distribution of the cell phone type. So we had 77% of the panel who had an Android phone, 20% had a BlackBerry, and we actually had a few people who had both. This is simply a sample. This is not real data, but it is a demonstration of the application that we also built. One of the critical deliverables as part of this project was not only collect the data, but put it into a usable format for the CIMM users and members. And so what we did was we developed a web-based dashboard, and the dashboard was really focused on being able to look from a reach perspective all around, this Venn diagram methodology, which is focusing in on the interplay of the platforms. So this is just one of the sample screens from the application. Same thing for behavioral analysis. What you're really able to do on the Venn diagram in the application is to drill down into any one of those intersections and start to really get much more granular into the behaviors of those panelists. So these are just some screenshots to give you a flavor of the application that we developed. And like all things with this project, this was our initial start. We've gotten tons of great feedback from the CIMM users, and we're already in the midst of making modifications to this application. So some of the high-level insights, we too are at the very early stages of digging into the data, but I did want to really, more than sort of showing any great findings, I wanted to give a demonstration of the types of information that we're going to be looking at coming out of this panel. So what we did was we took 2 of the high sort of aggregate level projects. We actually conducted 25 different projects as part of this pilot for all of the various CIMM member companies, including some aggregate views, which is taking, the CIMM projects and looking at media exposure data, TV content, select websites, mobile sites across all of the member companies. And then we broke that into then two additionally discrete projects, which is people who were exposed to any of that content and also went to online video sites, and then another group who were exposed to any of that content who went to social media sites. So these are just some of the examples of the sites and the participating member companies that were included. But just to give, and the other thing that I would say is the biggest finding so far, and as we're digging in, is that this data varies dramatically across projects. So the ESPN data for this particular, these particular views is going to look very different than the ABC data, than the CBS data. So these are just simply, to give you a flavor for what the data is going to be showing. But when we look at cross-platform usage, we really focused in on time spent, and what we saw was that 90% of the time spent was with TV, 9% was with PC internet, and 1% was with mobile internet. And as you can see down the side, we're able to look at those exposures both in and out of home. When you start to look at users, we saw that if you kind of add up all the intersections there, you'll see that 89% of the cross-platform users used at least 2 screens. So whether that was TV, internet, mobile, it's really just simply adding up all of those intersections. And 1/3 of the panel actually used all 3 screens. When we looked at 3-screen usage specifically, so the people who actually were in that center bucket, we saw that the majority of users fell into the age category 35 to 49. They did skew more male. Nearly, I guess, all of the users that we looked at in this particular project had viewed YouTube, and 27% had viewed Netflix, and 30% had viewed Hulu. And I would say almost, half of the 3-screen users used at least one mobile app that were included in the CIMM measurement project. So as I said, these numbers are going to vary project by project, but this is to give you a flavor of the types of things that we measured. We actually did take a little bit of a fun leap here when we were looking at the data. Because we have the ability to tell when someone's in their home and when somebody's not in their home. So we went about building sort of a surrogate for at-work usage, which is something that we have very little information in the industry about. But we said if you registered your PC as a work, you said it was for work or dual use, and the use was occurring while you were out of your home, we said, let's just take a peek and call that at-work use and see what it looks like. And so we saw that 34% of the users accessed the CIMM member company content while at work. 66% used PC internet at work, 51% mobile, 73% viewed YouTube, 13% viewed Netflix, and then 12% viewed Hulu, and they averaged 42 minutes on the site. Social media was another category that we looked at, and we, here we're looking at people who had any interaction with the television content, and we saw that 9 out of 10 users, or 94%, actually who viewed the CIMM member content also visited Facebook. And then 95% basically visited all the other sites. So I think the key message here is that Facebook attracted as many viewers as all other social media sites combined. So, a big part of this was lessons learned. What did we learn? What are the acknowledgments that we're ready to make about, this type of research? And I think one of the big ones, and maybe the most important, is that a high-quality, single-source, cross-platform panel provides critical linkages for scalable solutions. And what that means is that This data has its place in the future solution, absolutely. But how we now take this high quality sample and grow it to a size big enough that we can do these linkages to make it as big as the industry is going to need it to be in a cost-effective way is going to require collaboration, and it's going to require, just some future thinking about the use of cross-platform, because it is not the be-all, end-all. It's not where the solution for cross-platform measurement necessarily ends. Single-source three-screen recruitment and empanelment techniques will continue to be refined over time. Again, I feel like that's something we really haven't talked a lot about, but it's how do you work with these panelists to make sure that you're providing proper instructions on what exactly we're asking them to do. How do we keep them in the panel so that we're not paying them as soon as they download the meter and then having them leave the panel, for example. We learned a lot about operating system upgrades on mobile phones and the impacts that those can have on the metering devices that we're using in the background. And another thing is, we certainly acknowledge, and this is not really a learning because this is more of an acknowledgement, but Apple products are absolutely essential for representing cross-platform usage. We have to figure out a way to work with Apple to be able to get those devices into our panels so that we can measure both Apple phones and tablets, and we're working toward that in 2012. As far as the data goes, I think, this is kind of echoing some things that have been said today, but syndicated approaches to cross-platform reporting will require industry consideration to ensure that appropriate comparisons are being made across media. And an example of that is that Arbitron actually did collect from all of the panelists in our panel all of their radio listening data, because that's, certainly a core competency at Arbitron. And now, what we need to do is we need to figure out a responsible way to represent local radio on par with national television. So that's just an example of a consideration that we're all going to have to work together as an industry to resolve. And I think the definition of a three-screen user, when we did the Olympics project, it was all about 2 screens, and it so quickly went to 3 screens, and now it's, is the tablet a 4th screen? Is it mobile? Is it a 4th screen? How do we handle that? So I think just the very definition of a 3-screen or cross-platform user will continue to evolve. And I think just having intuitive software and having the resources back in your organization to really mine the data. I think the last learning here that I'll share with this project is, you get out what you put in. And so you have to have people who are willing to spend the time with the data and really tease out the stories, or you have to acknowledge up front that you absolutely don't have those people and you need to work with either a consultant or the folks at Arbitron to make sure that you're going to get the resources that you need to really mine your data. And with that, I will conclude. At this point, I'd like to introduce Artie Bulgrin, Senior Vice President of Research and Analytics at ESPN.
Thank you very much, Carol. We have a saying in our department, why guess when you can know? And I hope you're getting the message that today is about putting us on the path of knowing and limiting the guesswork about cross-platform measurement. Now, you just finished hearing from David, Joan, and Carol discuss 3 cross-platform measurement initiatives that have come out of the CIMM incubator, if you will, for lack of a better term. David certainly did a great job reviewing USA Touchpoints, which is more of a user-centric tool for measuring multi-platform use specifically to fulfill the void in planning. Joan and Carol did a great job describing their work that their companies are specifically doing to measure cross-platform usage, but more electronically and more passively, and in this case, focused on video. Now, let me just say that in the world of cross-platform media, these measurement initiatives should be considered complementary and all necessary, the point being that they satisfy different needs and different levels of precision and what we're going to need in the future of cross-platform. So, for example, we certainly need the consumer-centric measures of USA Touchpoints. We need that 360-degree view of media behavior and insight. But we also need to make use of the best and ideally passive measurement technology and analytics for critical content that runs across platforms such as for video in this case. And all the while, we have to continue focusing on improving and in some cases creating, in the world of mobile, for example, the best available measures of currency for each individual medium. So as you can see, what we're after here is that there are different layers of research necessary to solve all the questions that we have in our industry today. And it's filling in those knowledge gaps about multi-platform usage and its impact on advertising, specifically brand advertising, that is the challenge that CIMM has taken on over the past couple of years. And of course, a big question related to that is one of metrics. And I'm here today to say that while a lot has changed, the media math really hasn't changed, and I've been in this business for 30 years. The problem that we have today, and you've heard it over and over again, it's been a very, very productive day in that we're not really contradicting ourselves. We're I think, communicating the same message now that we're at the 4 o'clock time period, is that we can't answer the most fundamental questions about media use. And yet a lot of people, mostly outside of this room, don't seem very concerned, which is, I think, why we're moving very, very slowly. Now, case in point, last month, Bob Baracci, who you heard from earlier today, the president and CEO of the ARF, wrote, I thought, a very terrific piece in Ad Age entitled The Illusion of Precision, the Future of Media Measurement. And in it, Bob discusses a view that I share, that the dilemma of the digital age that we're in right now is that so much is either not measured at all or measured inadequately. And yet the perception is quite the opposite. It's this constant stream of data points that come at us each and every day that are available to us, but it creates only an illusion of precision when in fact we have a hell of a lot of work to do. We have all of this data, and yet we have very little knowledge about what the consumer is, how the consumer is using media and interacting with advertising. One of the things that we desperately need is uniformity in media metrics across platforms, and so we certainly applaud the work that the IAB, the ANA, and the 4As are doing through their 3MS initiative along those lines. But in addition to that, we also need brand new cross-platform measurement solutions like some of the ones that we heard today to fill the huge knowledge gaps about intermediate usage so that we can make holistic assessments of consumer audiences and impressions across platforms, something we just don't have today. Now, despite much change in our business, I'm here to say that for measuring content and exposure to brand advertising, the fundamental math really hasn't changed. And in our view, it continues to be about 3 basic measures: how many, how often, and how long, or to put it more technically, unduplicated reach, frequency, and time. And I believe that with these 3 measurement variables standardized across media, we can answer the basic necessary questions that are impossible today, and finally establish a common language. Now, in traditional media, the variables of how many, how often, and how long have been used for decades to create the quintessential metric of media currency known as the rating, also known as average audience. And we already heard that phrase talked about today. And by the way, it's called a rating because it represents the rate of usage within a unit of time. In network television, it's average minute audience. Now, to further illustrate the practical importance of this, let's say for the digital platforms that we work with, let's look at 2 fictitious websites creatively called Site A and Site B. Now, in this case, just to keep this very, very simple, Site A Hello? Okay. 1, 2, 3, we're back on. So Site A delivered, let's assume that Site A delivered 50 million unique users in a particular month, while Site B delivered 30 million unique users, and this is the how many part of the equation, right? However, users of Site A averaged only about 30 minutes on the site because they visited infrequently, and when they did, they didn't stay very long. That's the how often and the how long part. Conversely, users of Site B averaged about 90 minutes on the site, and that's because their behavior was different. They visited frequently and actually stayed longer when they did. As a result, in any given minute, the potential audience to an ad is nearly twice as large on Site B as it is on Site A. And it's this average minute audience, the same standard that we use for national television, that I believe best represents the potential audience for an ad at any given time. And it keeps things very, very simple, and it creates a language that we can use across the industry. Now, another benefit of this average audience concept is a practical one, and it allows us to make direct comparisons of usage across media platforms and provide solid estimates of incremental audience. Now, this chart illustrates a real example of a report that we actually generated at ESPN on a weekly basis, and it tells us the proportion of our daily average minute audience coming from television and digital media each day throughout the average week. In this case, we're looking at an average of fourth quarter data across 7 days individually, and then Monday through Sunday. So, for example, on Sundays in fourth quarter, ESPN's digital media represented about 26% of ESPN's total media usage on those days. So at any given time on Sunday, slightly more than 1 in 4 ESPN media consumers were on a digital platform. We know that today. We can get that today from our own internal analytics and from Nielsen data. The problem is the industry doesn't see it, and we're not seeing what the other media companies are using. We don't have this dialogue going on, and as Ed said before, you know, we go in and show this to a client and it's nice, but we don't have this ecosystem. We don't have a currency that we get to work with across the table. So to know more than that, like what is the incremental reach across platforms over time, what was the duplication across platforms, each individual touch point, we absolutely need cross-platform research. Now, to continue this discussion, I need to make clear that because of the onset of cross-platform research, and we've been doing it periodically over the last 10 years, starting with a company called Knowledge Networks, SRI, we need to make clear that we know now that media use is not a zero-sum game. But in fact, that was the conventional wisdom not too long ago, before companies like Knowledge Networks actually started measuring cross-platform usage and gave us the insight to know that. So for example, in this chart, which we update annually, according to 2011 data from Knowledge Networks, Americans spent, and I think Patty from Unilever alluded this earlier this morning, Americans spend about 77.5 hours with media per week, which is just over 11 hours per day, and again, more than we do just about anything else. And we use media all day long and increasingly away from home in opportunities that we call new markets of time. Now, what is a new market of time? Well, this room of about 300 people is a new market of time. So it's about 4:20 in the afternoon, and maybe at the break, you're a Time Warner Cable subscriber, and you're just getting wind of the fact that this Jeremy Lin sanity stuff took on a whole new meaning last night. And you know what? Rather than listen to this research geek talk about metrics, I'm going to go to ESPN.com and play back that buzzer beater that happened last night. And you know what? That's okay with me. If we can generate a few hundred impressions for ESPN, Ed will be very, very happy about that. For you non-sports fans, this chart shows the incremental time that we spend with media as we add different platforms to our mix, right? It goes right up to TV plus 4 other platforms. And as you can see, all of that usage is incremental to television. So TV is not cannibalized, and in fact, the more media platforms or touch points that we use throughout the day, the more time we spend with media, which is why we're at nearly 11.5 hours per day. But this is the opportunity for marketers. If we have the information, if we have the analytics, if we have the right metrics, the opportunity to reach you while you're playing back that highlight on ESPN.com is a great one, because you're going to be incredibly focused as you're engaged in that content and in that advertising. But these are very high-level measures right now. What we have today to work with are great, but in many cases they're very blunt instruments, and they're conducted only periodically. What we need ultimately is much more granularity and ongoing measurement for decision-making and tracking performance. And when it comes to the most important metrics for cross-platform, we must consider the full media marketing continuum. In other words, the needs of sellers and buyers of media for advertising, so that we're speaking a common language across the table. Now, let me talk a little bit about measurement goals on the planning and then on the back end side. First, on the planning side, we need solid measures first of behavior. And we heard about that earlier on. Certainly David spoke about it in looking at USA touch points, because we really need to understand deeply how consumers are using media. We need to know certainly the size of the audience across platforms in terms of unduplicated audience or users, how much time they spend with media and each individual medium. and that in turn relates to usage. We also need insights about where and when consumers are using each platform. We need that for context, and then ultimately, evaluating these variables across platforms can inform a precise, much more precise media mix and weight for each medium, much more precise than we have today based on those insights. On the posting side, we need even more precise measures of media impact in terms of, first of all, exposure, how much potential audience was exposed to the ad and actually had an opportunity to see the ad. Did I reach my target audience efficiently? How much waste did I suffer? And finally, did my reach and frequency goals, let's talk about reach and frequency goals for a second. How was my audience created? Was it about reach? Was it about frequency? And how did each individual media touchpoint actually contribute to that audience in terms of unduplicated reach and frequency? Did mobile increase my audience because it was an increased exposure over television, or was it clearly a unique exposure? Now, on the planning side, we're already making some progress in USA Touchpoints. It's proven to be a viable solution to understand behavior usage across media platforms and actually provide some critical insights to inform decisions about media mix and weight. This is a different look at the same data that David was sharing earlier. What's interesting about this is that because Touchpoints uses this common unit of audience by time, by half hour, the audiences for each medium can be stacked to give us an idea of the reach that can be achieved in any particular time period across these individual Touchpoints. This is information we never had before we had this particular tool in our hands. On the posting side, we have much tougher questions to answer that simply cannot be answered today with any level of precision. And to do this, we need actually more passive real-time measurement solutions to answer questions like, I just invested $1 million in 10 million impressions, but how did I get there? How did I get to those 10 million impressions? And in fact, was it high reach and low frequency? Was it moderate reach and moderate frequency? Was it low reach and high frequency? These are all critical questions to actually understand how ad exposure performance worked and to inform and strengthen planning models in the future and ultimately improve future campaigns. And of course, this will require an effective universal watermark system or tag system, such as Taxi, to verify exposure across all of these individual platforms. So if we can answer those questions with effective measures of unduplicated audience at the end of the day across media platforms, then we can solve the duplication dilemma, which is a real one for planning. In other words, to better inform the media mix models that today rely in large part on estimated or random duplication that could either understate or severely overstate true intermedia effects. This chart illustrates results from 3 real studies that ESPN completed comparing actual reach of TV plus internet and TV plus mobile audiences to what random duplication estimates would have told us. And in each case, the estimate based on random duplication actually understated the reach of these 2 individual media platforms. It's a significant problem in the industry. So for example, in study number 1, the TV internet reach was actually 3 times greater than what random duplication would have otherwise estimated. Now clearly, there are great modelers in this industry that are doing a very good job, but the fact remains that we lack the necessary input data to do this as precisely as possible and ultimately limit error. So today, this is really all we know about our 10 million impressions, right? It's what we get from our siloed measures because that's all we have. When in fact, our Venn diagram should look a lot more like this. All right, this paints a picture of understanding truly how our campaign worked at the end of the day. So to sum up, and keep it simple, we have 3 essential metrics that really have been the standard variables for as long as media has been evaluated, and that hasn't changed. They're how many, they're how often, and how long. And in combination, these individual variables form practical audience estimates that represent the rate of usage of media and the potential audience impressions at any given time. So as we pursue single-source measurement solutions for planning and performance, these 3 metrics should be fundamental to our measurement goals. And since continuous electronic cross-platform measurement may not be practical yet, but we're going to get there, we should seek standardization of media metrics across platforms based on how many, how often, and how long. ultimately getting to the standard of average minute audience. So let's call it the common language for media and advertising. It'll give us both precision and utility. I thank you very much. Now please welcome Dr. Michele Madansky of Media and Market Research Consulting to talk about the ROI piece.
So I had the privilege of co-authoring a white paper on behalf of CIMM around cross-platform advertising effectiveness measurement. The white paper itself is over 40 pages, and since it takes me 15 seconds to actually say cross-platform advertising effectiveness measurement, I have two goals for today. The first goal is I'm hoping to whet your appetite around what this white paper is about. So if you haven't read it, and I was pleased to see several people today kind of came up to me and said that they have read this white paper. If you haven't, hopefully you can go to the CIMM website and download it. The second thing is that I really wanted to walk away with something tangible that you can go back and do today to, we're talking about all these awesome things which are in the future, and I can't wait to get my hands on all this single source panel data, but what are the things that we can do as marketers today to help solve that issue? So the objective of the CIMM white paper was to not only evaluate the current approaches, and I will talk to you about some of the challenges, some of the limitations, but also to come up with what are some of the opportunities to help innovate in this space. And again, I don't have time to go through all of it, but there is a lot of innovation which is happening. And the CIMM members went through the opportunities that we presented, and that helped them kind of figure out what the roadmap is going to be for 2012. In order to write this white paper, I talked to a lot of you and a lot of the people in this room. So it was great to get the different perspectives from the marketers whose money we're spending, from the agencies who are working on behalf of the marketers, from the media companies who are often conducting these cross-platform studies, as well as all of the kind of key vendors. And some of these vendors we had decided to talk to a priori. Some of them came up in the discussions. So thank you all for your time. People were very passionate. Some people spent 2 hours with me talking about cross-platform advertising effectiveness because, it is a hot topic. And, as Patty kind of started the day, how are we using this? Is to help adjust media mix in the future, preferably to actually optimize mid-campaign, to understand the synergistic role of media, and to help with cross-media planning. The goal was to specifically talk about ROI and ad effectiveness versus planning tools, though. So, state of the industry, and I think we're all here today, and it's great to see this crew all the way in the back there, that it's becoming increasingly important to talk about cross-platform ad effectiveness. And while some of the tools are kind of satisfactory, I heard a lot of meh, I'm not thrilled. I'm not, there's not one solution which is doing everything for us. And again, it was nice to see that there's a lot of innovation which maybe we weren't all aware of. And there's also trade-offs. And I ran into a vendor in the hallway and said, there are trade-offs between how much it's going to cost to get there and what we can do today. And I think that's something that we all need to recognize. There's agreement that single source solution is the holy grail, but again, we are not there. So just a few quotes from some agency executives. Mobile is pushing the cross-platform advertising effectiveness issue. Video could be included in that. And there's a desire overall, and again, all of us in this room talking about there's a desire to build a better mousetrap. So if it is 3 years from now when we're all sitting here with all the single source data, which will be exciting, whether it is Taxi, which is helping us out, but today lots of money is going into mobile and digital media, and we need to figure it out. One of the benefits of talking to all these vendors is that they gave me some nice charts. So this is from Insight Express, and I like how it talks about kind of the evolution. So when I started my career, I started in the marketing sciences group at BBDO. And back when panel data first came along, it was so exciting to be able to look at marketing mix models and look at the ROI of your media investments. In the 2000s is really when cross-media tracking has become more important as things like video everywhere, search, social, mobile, everything that we're talking about today. So I'm going to talk to you about each of these broad areas very briefly. So when we talk about cross-platform advertising effectiveness, one of the groups is what we're calling opportunity to see. So the basic premise is that people are recruited who were exposed to a digital advertisement. They are then surveyed. In the survey, they are asked brand metrics, but they're also asked questions to get at what other offline media might they have viewed. And I'll show you an example. We're also going to talk a little bit about lab testing and then marketing mix modeling and some other tools that people are using. This is from Millward Brown, and this might help you kind of recognize one of these opportunity to see outputs. So basically what we're looking at is here are all the kind of brand dimensions that we're trying to measure. Here is the difference between television only, television online, television plus print, TV plus online plus print. So this is kind of the basic notion of opportunity to see measurement. And for what it is, can be very valuable. You can get results mid-campaign and potentially optimize. However, there are a number of challenges. So not going into great detail, but just to kind of talk at a high level, one of them is apples to oranges of measurement. So on the digital side, we are passively measuring that somebody was exposed to the ad. On the offline media, it's did you watch this certain program? Did you watch television at this time? There's different ways of getting at it which are not similar. You might also ask the survey immediately after exposure to the online ad, whereas you could be asking about television or print media a week or a month after they viewed it. So that's what we call apples to oranges. Murky experimentation. This, for all the kind of statisticians in the room, drives you crazy, the control group being murky. And so there's lots of reasons. comScore says it's 30% of all users delete their cookies every month. One reason. Another reason is I'm looking at ESPN on my mobile phone, but I'm being served the survey on my laptop. Also, you're not getting clean control groups. So that is a challenge. What I call freaks and geeks is around response rates. And this is an industry-wide problem. So in some cases, I have actually had online ad effectiveness studies where I've gotten 0.01% response rate. So it is that the 1 out of 10,000 people who actually took the survey, is that really representative of who was exposed to the campaign overall? And finally, which is a somewhat related topic, is what I'm calling the dropouts. So there's Visu studies and Dime Store and Dynamic Logic, which now have kind of these shorter surveys. But these cross-platform ones, if you've ever taken them, they're a bear. They could take 20, 30 minutes. And so even if you're the 1 out of 10,000 people who actually takes a survey, are you going to actually complete it? So those are some of the challenges. And I don't mean to be gloom and doom, because I do think there's a lot of innovation happening. And I do encourage you to kind of read what all these companies are doing to kind of combat some of these issues. But there's real challenges. Lab testing. Again, for the statisticians in the room, this is awesome because it's pure experimental design. You can get someone into a lab, or you can do it online, and you can make sure that they were exposed to the tablet and the television program and look at a print ad. And there's lots of the companies in here have their own labs, and other benefits are getting men. Men are not going to take these online surveys. Men 21 to 34, but if you pay them enough, you can get them into a lab. You can get kids into a labs. So some of the challenges that were brought up in the interviews are around when you get into the lab environment, is it the shiny new toy of the iPad that they're going to be paying more attention to? Is it really a realistic environment given how men 18 to 34 are consuming media across multiple devices today? So again, I think it's great for pure experimentation, but there are some challenges. Marketing mix modeling. So I think that, was it Mark who mentioned this earlier? Marketing mix modeling is a great technique. There are some challenges, of course, with it. One of them is that it might take 6 months before you get the results after the campaign ran. So there's nothing that's actionable in that time period. There are many marketing mix modeling firms that don't really know how to parse out digital data in a way that's meaningful. They'll consider all display ad in one bucket versus looking at rich media, looking at video, looking at cost per acquisition versus CPM media buys, targeted media versus non. So there's lots of nuances involved with media mix modeling, which not every modeling firm knows. And if you're working with a firm, I encourage you to ask them all those questions so that they can get smarter. It's also looking at media in isolation. We're not looking at the synergistic effect of them because there are different variables in the models. So, and then oftentimes smaller tactics like social and mobile might not even be able to be picked up in the models. So, what is a practitioner to do? There's all these different ways of getting at advertising effectiveness, but there's not one solution which is getting everything together. So again, in the white paper, we mentioned 5 kind of broad areas of opportunity, which are about improving current methodologies, tackling some of the missing data issues, coming up with best practices or validating some of the best practices which are out there, talking about data mashups, and then shared learning and best practices. So for today, I just want to leave you with one thought in terms of a best practice. And that is really around coordination and integration. So all of these tools are at your disposal. You might have a brand tracking study. You might have an opportunity to see cross-media study. You might have a marketing mix modeling study, which you're currently doing. You might also be testing social or testing video and do a Visu study or a dime store study to look at the impact of specifically one media. Doesn't mean that the challenge is that you need to bring it all together, and you need to come up with a way to say, how can I make meaningful, actionable insights based on all these different studies which we're doing? And it might be the case that someone in your team can do that. They might have the bandwidth, they might have the wherewithal to kind of interpolate between these two different studies and come up with actionable insights. So this is what I'm calling the kumbaya approach. So hopefully all of you can walk out of the door and say, you know what, we're already doing all this stuff, and it doesn't do anyone any good if one study is sitting on the shelf and something else is sitting someplace else. So just want to show you a few examples of stuff which I've seen out there, which I think is kind of getting at this notion. This is an example from MMA, and they have a partnership with comScore. So first of all, MMA is doing multi-stage mix modeling, which is looking at the impact that television and offline media have in terms of driving online, which is one component of it. But they're also looking at, have a partnership with comScore where they're doing opportunity to see studies and then interpolating the data into their models for forecasting purposes. So if mobile is something which you can't pick up in the model, maybe you can pick it up in the opportunity to see study and then come up with a projection for that. So again, it's kind of a little bit of a mashup, but at least trying to get at some of those answers. This is from 3D Accountability. Some of you might know it's a consulting firm. Ethan Rapp and Dave Gantman started it. And this is one of their core competencies, is bringing together these different things. So if it's not something that your team has the bandwidth or the expertise to do, if you can't get the vendors in the room to kind of come up with something together, potentially you can find an outside consulting firm to help you with that. So in conclusion, there are a lot of challenges, but there's also a lot of opportunities. There's opportunities to use the existing research that we have. There's opportunities to improve on the current methodologies, whether it's opportunity to see